Hello, you're watching TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick. We're here in Berlin, in Germany, at the OPNFV Summit 2016, and I'm talking with Chris Wright, who is VP and Chief Technologist at Red Hat. Chris, good to see you again. The last time we met was in a cellar bar in Barcelona.
Right.
We seem to be doing the bees. Now we're in Berlin. Next time, who knows? Bristol, Bratislava, somewhere like that. I know we first met in Dusseldorf, also in Germany, so
Yeah.
what goes around comes around. Anyway, OPNFV will be 2 in September. It's toddling. It's going full bore. And what do you make of it? Has it lived up to the industry's expectations of it, do you think? How is it evolving and growing? And how does Red Hat participate in it?
Well, I can tell you it's been quite a journey, and we've been involved from the beginning. Red Hat is a founding platinum member of the OPNFV project, and personally, it's really surpassed my expectations. I expected that OPNFV was a place where we would bring together the telecommunications industry, gather requirements, feed those requirements in a language that's understandable to the relevant upstream communities as code and changes, bring back that development and those changes into the OPNFV community, integrate, test, validate that we've done what we set out to do. And in there, I sort of expected that we would slowly build up this information or understanding of the telecommunications industry and then slowly fuse out into the individual projects, meaning OPNFV wouldn't have the same size and growth that we're seeing today, so personally, it's surpassing my expectations. What we're seeing instead is this continued growth and rallying around the cause. And you saw earlier today in the OPNFV Summit some statistics showing that it's absolutely resonating with the industry. 99% success rating essentially, and that tells me that we're really doing something that's meaningful. I think we still have a lot of work to do. So we still have we've been initially in this phase of kind of bootstrapping and getting ourselves going and focus on how do we do the integration work and deliver something that looks like a platform for telcos. What we need to do now is really shift gears and focus deeply on that upstream development part so we can actually start closing a lot of the functional gaps that are really critical for the service providers. So it's a great time to be reflective. We're coming up on 2 years. I think we've personally surpassed my expectations, and then as an industry, you never know exactly where we set the bar, but clearly we're resonating, and I do think we still have a lot of work to do, so good place to be.
Good stuff. Okay, next question. The old dictum that the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the land applies in telecoms and communications technology as much as it does anywhere else. And what we've seen throughout history really is that a good idea will come along, a trend will begin, and the ones that pioneered it are not necessarily overtaken, but they're sort of surrounded by upstarts and hangers-on who will jump on the bandwagon whenever they can. What we've seen over the past few months, not that long, and certainly since OPNFV began, is a plethora of new open source initiatives and bodies that have sprung into being. Do you think there are too many, and are you participating in more than one?
Well, for me personally, yeah, there's too many. We could slow it down a little bit. No, but seriously, there's a lot of innovation going on, and so we're in this phase of what I would call expansion. I like your analogy to settlers, or we're expanding. That expansion phase, I believe, will end with some cream rising to the top, and we'll really start to understand better not only what problems we're solving, but the best ways to solve those problems. And with that, I expect some consolidation, and that's true from kind of a business perspective of companies and mergers and acquisitions and that kind of thing, but also from an open source project point of view. So right now, every time we see a space that's unsolved, we tend towards, well, okay, let's go create some code and create a project around that code to solve that problem. I think there's a couple of things we need to pay attention to. One is, are there already things out there that solve that problem and or close enough that it's worth investing in those projects to kind of evolve them to meet the needs of a particular industry segment like the telecommunications industry. Two, it's really about looking to see, do we need to create new things, or can we bring ourselves together to collaborate in the spaces where we already are? So, I think initially, interestingly enough, one of the proposals we pushed to the NFV, the ETSI NFV ISG, was don't create a new foundation. This is pre-OPNFV. Let's get directly involved in the existing communities. clearly OPNFV is resonating and solving some problems for the industry. So there's always that question, do you create something new or do you leverage what's there? I think it remains to be seen, but I do expect to see a little more expansion and then some
A
contraction.
coalescence.
Yeah.
Yeah. As long as there isn't a black hole at the end
That's
of it.
right.
All right. Okay. I don't want you to give away any sort of state secrets or anything like that, but can you give us some use cases or some ideas of the real experience that you've had at Red Hat of using open source to deploy NFV for telcos?
Well, one thing I can say is we are moving from sort of early trials, planning into production in all geographies around the world. So it's really accelerating from just initial ideas to really maturing as a real concrete component of the global telecommunications network infrastructure. We're seeing this, we made some announcements at the OpenStack Summit around our customer Verizon, and what they've done in a very short order of time has gone from a blank slate to large-scale rollout across multiple data centers of this NFV infrastructure that's supporting their entire next-generation network. So this stuff is very real, and it's powering the next generation, where right now we're in 4G, a lot of talk about 5G, some talk about maybe there's a 4.5G between here and there, and where exactly are we? NFV is a critical component, substrate to all of that transformation, and you're seeing that happen today. So it's great to see.
Thank you. What about service providers? Are they really ready for open source? Now, I don't just mean in terms of being technically ready for it, because a lot of them will be if they're not already, but in terms of culture and organization.
Short answer, no.
That's fair enough.
But what it really highlights is that technology is a part of the solution. It's not the solution. And what we're seeing is a kind of an impedance mismatch in terms of the cultures, the people, the process of how service providers have built their networks, which includes the procurement, it's the operations, it's the whole end-to-end chain, that supply chain. We're seeing an impedance mismatch with how things have been done and how open source communities, development processes, and ultimately the products that come out of that and deliver into the service providers change that supply chain. And so I think that if you talk to many of the service providers, they're excited about the technology. They're working internally to figure out how are they going to shift their internal processes and culture to adopt. And one of the things I really like about the kind of vocal stance that John Donovan's taken from an AT&T perspective is it's not just about setting lofty goals and where are we going with Domain 2.0, but it's also saying there's some real practical realities. And we are offering massive training to our workforce to help them move from the old school to the new school. And that really highlights that there's kind of a cultural change that needs to happen. And that's why I'd say glibly, no, they're not ready. But generally speaking, I think they're really interested in moving in this direction.
Thank you. Can I talk about service providers for a moment? What do you think they want from open source in general?
Well, I think I think one of the expectations is that open source helps them innovate and move their networks to a new place more rapidly. I think there's always this kind of challenge or misconception of open source equals free. There's real development. There's people doing real work that are paid engineers to do this work. So understanding where open source fits into their business model is really important. And kind of along those lines, there's some interesting open questions for service providers and vendors alike about that relationship, the supplier-customer relationship. Where are service providers taking on some roles of systems integrations for themselves? And where are they relying on their traditional vendors to do that integration for them? Where in the legacy environment, a solution was typically integrated top to bottom, hardware up through orchestration layer. Now we're looking at interoperability across a substrate, a platform, a fabric of different functions with still some kind of consistent management on top. That requires a bunch of different vendor ecosystem relationships and changes the total dynamics. So what are they expecting from open source? Definitely innovation, rapid change in their infrastructure, and how are they operating with their vendors? I think that's part of the cultural change that we'll see play out.
You've led me beautifully onto my last question, which is, of course, about vendors, which you are intimately interested. What do communication service providers want from the vendor community as far as open source is concerned?
Well, they definitely want an open ecosystem. So they want to be able to build a solution for themselves out of best of breed components so that it's not this vertically integrated stack that we've seen in the past. Gives them flexibility, gives them choice. Certainly it gives them some business dynamic changes in how they can make sure that they get the best cost efficiencies for themselves. So I think the expectation is flexibility from the vendors to work with other vendors who, in a vertically integrated stack world, are competitors. In a disaggregated world, they need to become, cooperative. So it's an interesting dynamic, and that's again one of these cultural shifts and changes in business dynamics that makes, to me, the whole thing fun. It's not just a technology change, but it's this whole transformation of the telecommunications industry.
Absolutely excellent interview, Chris Wright. Thank you
you
very much indeed.
Enjoyed it. Thanks.